Hello, and welcome to the Insight to Revenue podcast. Very excited to have you guys here today to talk about the absolutely favorite topic on everyone's minds these days, prospecting. And we've got Will from Lavender here. Couldn't have a better guest than Will Allred. This is a topic near and dear to his heart. And so, Will, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me. And then for those who aren't familiar with me, I'm Will Allred. I'm one of the co-founders at a company called Lavender. We've analyzed well over 1 billion sales emails at this point. And so we spend a lot of time talking about cold email in particular. And so prospecting, opening up conversations, it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Spend a lot of time in the data around it as well.
Fantastic. And so, we're going to do something a little different here today. We're going to actually share some concepts and research on that topic, and we're going to splash them in front of Will and see what his reactions are. He's seen some of this content, but I'm making him do it on the fly, and we'll try to get some nice little insights and nuggets for you guys to catch up on in the next 15 minutes or so. So let's dive right in.
Yeah, Zach gave me no prep time, so this will be fun.
Best practice.
That's right. That's right.
All right. So let's start off with the problem statement here. So some of you guys who've been following us may know that we did a broad study of more than 50 companies over the past 9 months, as well as dozens and dozens of interviews. And this data, the data that came back was overwhelmingly clear that the hardest thing that companies are trying to do right now, where they feel they have their biggest gaps, is filling the pipeline with quality and quantity of opportunities. And so building that awareness, prospecting is obviously at the center of the plate of what companies are trying to figure out how to break through the noise these days. And so when we actually look at this data, it doesn't surprise us because right now we just hear constantly about this story of what's so hard out there in the marketplace. And so there is a good news story. There are companies like Lavender out there and other companies that can put tools in front of your teams to actually get much better at how they prospect, how they reach out to the right customer at the right time. But at the end of the day, the noise in the system in that echo chamber is radically high right now, right? So, there's some stats you may have seen before, but most of the buying is done without you in the process as a sales organization. The amount and volume of emails people are receiving per day and messages, and they're inundated with information. And then, in fact, they've got these huge buying groups now involved to approve even some small purchases, and on and on. So there's a number of numbers there. Well, what jumps out to you? What are you seeing?
Yeah, and there's two very different but at the same time similar topics that you can kind of get into with this, right? I mean, that 121 number obviously stands out to me loads because I feel it in my day to day as well as an operator, right? Like, um, yeah, I also have a job at at the end of the day, and so when I think about like getting 121 emails a day, like that feels right, right? That feels like, um, it feels overwhelming. It feels like it gets in the way of me being able to do what I need to do, right? I think a lot of sellers fail to recognize what's happening on the other end from the buyer's point of view. And so when you think about that first slide that you showed, that piece around how do you get awareness? How do you become top of mind to someone? It's so hard. And like the reason this is the case, right? They're talking about awareness is people are looking for any possible avenue in order to kickstart a conversation, break in into an account. And so they're like, okay, well, maybe if they're aware of us, they'll open the door, right? I always liken this to my wife works at Uber, for example, right? Well, if you start your conversation with, hey, I'm over at Uber and like we were checking out your company, like you'll probably be able to start a conversation, right? They know who you are, there's awareness there, there's familiarity. Um, but when you think about trying to start the conversation from teeny tiny company like Lavender's point of view, right? It's a little bit different, right? Like people, it's not a household name, and so trying to generate some of that, like, oh, I know who that is. It probably feels like a safeguard for a lot of executives to say that's what we're going to focus on because it's going to have massive impact down the rest of the funnel. If that's true, all the other stuff should fall in line. And I don't necessarily agree with their feelings on the matter, right? The
Mm.
reality is you know, Uber or whomever could reach out to me, right? Nike, right? Here's the problem with Nike. They could reach out to me, but what's Nike gonna do for our software company, right? Like at the end of the day, the rubber meets the road at like, can you actually solve problems for me? And so, that you put it really well in the slide, which is like, they're not focused on filling the funnel. The funnel's the important thing, right? The funnel is the thing that actually is going to generate opportunities. And so I talk to sales leaders all the time, and they're in this moment in time where deal cycles are getting elongated. It's harder and harder to get deals to close. And so win rates are down. And so they're trying to generate more pipeline to cover for this, you know, failure on the other end. Which I understand. I get it. It's simple math, right? But in trying to break through, we're using these like old playbooks that don't necessarily reflect the reality of what is at our disposal today. And so,
Yeah.
what used to be a competitive differentiator for a sales team was volume, right? If I can send more emails than Zach today, well, I'm going to have more success. Well, that existed in a world where, you know, I was personalizing every single touch point and I wasn't necessarily praying, you know, templates across, every single account that I touch. And so I think I think a really good way to look at this is almost like astronomy, right? In that there is a way that like astronomers when like they have a new telescope and they're trying to like scan the sky and they go about it, right? Every time they get a new telescope, they're able to like get a higher and higher quality like picture. Um, you know, the problem with like sales works is they have the telescope and they haven't necessarily upgraded like the camera lens. They're just like trying to take a bunch of pictures across the sky and like hopefully, getting as many photographs as humanly possible in order to like paint the picture of what's going on in that market. And the problem is like the reality of spam filtering, the reality of the true efficiency metrics that people are driving when they do that. I think of things like the initial discovery call, for example. For a lot of companies, it's an unnecessary step that they're putting in place because of the way they prospect, right? The way they go about prospecting is so here's what we do. Can you translate that to your problems and tell me if that's interesting enough to have a conversation? Right. And so what you're
Yeah.
doing is you're making it harder for yourself. You're making that pipeline coverage issue more difficult, as opposed to if you showed up and actually had a very refined point of view and you were one out of 121 emails that landed in my inbox today that were thoughtful, well intentioned, and said, like, hey, I actually understand like the context in which you are coming into this conversation, the things that you're dealing with, and like truly starting conversation from a thoughtful point of view, a place of intentionality. That deal's gonna move a lot faster. People are going to have a lot better sentiment for the brand that you're putting out there, um, and so that awareness piece, it's actually not as big of a deal as people think it is. Yeah, I think of retention, expansion. It'd be really interesting to see how these things trend over time, right? But yeah, I think the thing that's probably more important is like, are we going to be able to generate interest from these? I mean, obviously it
Yeah.
matters company state, who you're selling to, et cetera. But like, um, is there actual interest in what we do? Um, and like how we're talking to them versus are they aware we exist, right? Yeah, that's a money problem. And the problem is money is not as fast and loose as it was a couple years ago. And so like you can't just
Yeah.
buy awareness like you used to. So it's
Everybody's
it's not
feeling that.
surprising, but it's concerning, Zach.
Yeah. So how many will of those 121 emails a day do you? And this isn't the ones that people are sending you because you're Will from Lavender, and you do this as kind of a this
Yep.
is the other side of your life. But the ones of people pitching you to buy stuff, how many of those do you open the day?
Oh man. SalesLoft put some really interesting data out there around what percentage of the emails that go through their platform are automated versus personalized. We then
Hmm.
followed up on that research and said, okay, well, what's the difference across the billions of emails that we've analyzed to showcase the difference of efficacy? So 96% of the billion plus emails that go out of SalesLoft's system, um, 96% are automated, right? And the the reality is the 4%, most of those are probably not well written. But the 4%, well, they get about 13 times more replies. Um, so you think about the efficacy from that 4%. Well, 121, I don't know what 4% of that would be, right? But the um, the reality is just like, you maybe get a couple per day that are like thoughtfully crafted. You'll read through them. You'll give them more than um, the data on this is the average amount of time someone spends reading an email is 9 seconds. But you think about where that distribution curve lies. Most of them are actually deleted in the first 3 seconds, and so that 4%, the thoughtful ones, those are the ones that are getting that 9 seconds. Those are the ones that are getting the actual read through, not just a skim and now it's trash, throw it away.
Yeah, and I think that's a great pivot point. I know we're going to probably do a couple installments of this as we hit some of these hot topics, but to talk about what not to do in order to solve for this problem, I think you hit on some of the main points, which is we see a lot of the game of more still happening. So it's, oh, if there's more uh, emails my competition or more content my competition's putting out, then we're going to beat them at that scaling game. And then there's so much just automation behind that as far as content strategy, outreach. This has resulted in obviously a lot of hiring and firing of sales teams to try to beat the machine play.
Yeah, yeah,
And then ultimately it fills if your hit rate is decent, you might actually fill the funnel, but it ends up being with a lot of poor fit customers. And we know that turns into a lot of, ghosting and then people chasing with discounts. And so I think, one of the reasons that our companies and we get along so well, it's the focus of, really what is quality versus the quantity play. But when you think
yeah.
about what you've seen and people are some people are desperate right now, like what are the things absolutely you say you know don't do this, don't do these two three things?
Um, well, it's interesting. I think there's some like really, really tactical do's and don'ts, right? Like there's
Yeah.
the subject lines where you're putting in someone's first name using like inflammatory language in order to um, try to catch their attention. Those things actually like tank your chances, right? So like I can go down a list of like things that are going to trigger someone's mental spam filter. But then there's also like more strategic choices and decisions that companies can make, right? I think about teams that are just continuing to recycle old templates, old sequences, and are like beating their heads against the wall, wondering why they're not getting success. Duh. Of course you're not getting success. You're using the same thing that like didn't work back in 2020 and you're thinking it's going to work now. Um, the um, the biggest strategic thing that I want folks to start focusing on, I think we can continue to dive into this over multiple installments because it's just like it's such a deep topic. But this notion when like you bring on a seller, a lot of times their onboarding and their training is just like mimicry, right? It's like here's how we've done it, like go do this. Um, that particularly for email looks like templates, right? The problem with most templates is they're very product oriented, and so I think about when we scaled our own sales team, like we made very intentional decisions to like focus the training on like what are the problems that people have? How does that differ persona? How does that come to life in their day to day? Because
Hmm.
that's what people actually respond to. It's not the noise about your product. It's not the jargon about like, hey, I've spent time in your industry. I know what this acronym means, right? No one cares. At the end of the day, what I care about is like, I've got to get my to-do list done. You're either going to help me do that faster, or you're going to get in my way by adding more noise to my inbox, and so I'm going to delete you. Um, so yeah, and this by the way is not like a easily I think a lot of folks look at this as like AI is this magic wand of like AI is going to replace the like prospecting motion entirely, and I'm like that is further from the truth than people realize. I think we get a little like um we think there's this like magic pill that people are going to take and there's the perfect cold email on the other end. At a certain point we're over optimizing and thinking about it the wrong way, which is
Yeah.
um it shouldn't be how do we do it faster? How do we do more of it? How do we game the system? It should be how do we teach sellers to be thoughtful, dig a little bit deeper than other folks would, right? I posted on LinkedIn the other day. I was like, here's how our team prospects. We take, 10 to 12 new accounts per day and like three persona per account. So you're looking at like, new activity 35-ish.
Hmm.
And the the messages that we're putting out there, the calls that we're making, the DMs that we're sending, like they're based on minimum three pieces of research that create a unique point of view about who's on the other end, right? So like, you want to stand out in um, that category of the 4% that are personalizing. Well, actually show up with a point of view. Don't just like find a light, trigger event and like throw your pitch on the other side of that. AI is
Yeah.
making that very accessible, and buyers are getting very tired of it. It shows up, by the way, in the data, the tonality data. When you just start like talking about yourself, talking about your product, comes across as like super informative. Ounce of an informative tone, your reply rate just goes down 26% out of the gate. So that's like what 1 in 4 responses that you could have had, just like they just immediately tuned out and walked away.
Wow. And so I think on a, I know you've got to run to another meeting in a second here, but it's awesome to have you.
Mhm.
And I think people like sort of these digestible tips. I already have done a checklist of a number of things not to do and to do that you listed for us. And so, I guess as a final piece of advice before we go on to episode 2 soon. So first of all, Insight Revenue and Lavender have paired up to build a prospecting program to help companies think about this really strategically, right? So how do you think about the right ICPs and personas, target them with the right messaging that's going to focus on the problems that they care about, and then actually treat the BDR, SDR job and the AEs obviously doing prospecting in a much more strategic way and build the capabilities and skills to engage, write better emails, have better phone calls, etc. And so to wrap up for today, is there one last kind of word of advice of something you've seen that's you think it's really clever or people should start doing, um, or anything you'd like to leave us with before we run to our next
Yeah.
meetings?
One of the things that I'm finding is very effective right now, and I'm fingers crossed this doesn't become diluted fast from saying it, is name dropping. So, like, I can't just name drop anybody, right? Especially when you're talking about a massive company. So, you got to do like a lot of research in order to do this well. But yeah, I think about like if I'm reaching out to a sales leader or a, Jen Allen, who, introduced us both. She always references like using the CEO's comments like subject line and then like referencing exactly what
Hmm.
the CEO said. That's a great example of a name drop. So thinking about like name drops within cold emails or as well like a version of like a breakup email, which I refer to more of like a request for a referral. Um, yeah, putting someone's name in front of someone it hacks into a little bit of the psychology of how we go through our inbox, which is I'm looking for threads I look at like I recognize and names I recognize. And so, if somebody emails me and they're like, "Hey, as Brielle and Spencer have, been getting ramped up, dot dot dot." I see that preview text. I'll probably open it, right? I'm probably going to pay attention
Yeah.
because, there's a level of thoughtfulness that is really hard to imitate outside of that. So that immediately comes to mind as like an immediate tactical thing that folks should be doing and thinking about, um, and just sort of like using psychology to their benefit.
Awesome. Glad we got the famous Jen Allen reference in here today, who introduced us,
Always,
and
always gotta like
I'm sure
find
she's
a
going to
find a
listen
way
to
to
this
put
now.
in.
And yeah, man, great to have you on. Look forward to catching up again soon. Congrats on your relocation, and glad to be the first podcast you've
Thank
done
you.
from there. So yeah, have a great one, man, and we'll be talking again soon.